Hello and welcome back to Underscored. I'm your host, Stephen Kent, spokesperson and public relations manager for Young Voices. It has been a hell of a week to start back up on the news, driving politics, media, and policy. And I want to buck the norm a little bit here and start with something I had no idea was going on and has not really been talked about too much. So there is a lot of chatter right now about the cost of living in America's largest cities, mostly as a result of President Trump's attacks on Los Angeles and the state of California more broadly. And so he's been hitting homelessness mostly, and his critics are hitting back with the fact that the rent is too damn high and housing is scarce. So preceding all of this was a national debate in similar cities about the role of Airbnb, short-term rentals and home sharing apps that have sort of, in some people's opinion, contributed to the housing crisis. Now, hotels don't like this new industry. It is their competition. And the Bernie Sanders of the world link housing shortage to short-term rentals, among other things. So oddly enough, all of this ties into the ongoing debate about Section 230 regulations, part of the fight being had over social media regulation. That is, by the way, the Communications Decency Act. So joining me now to explain how the heck this has happened is Rob Winterton of Young Voices and NetChoice. He's been following a bill from Hawaii Congressman Ed Case called the Plan Act, and it goes after short-term rentals using Section 230, or more so by offering an amendment to it. Rob, thanks for coming on Underscored.
Of course. Thank you. Happy to talk to you about this.
Yeah. So, Rob, if I missed anything in my framing of the story here, what is going on with the Hawaii Congressman and the Plan Act? I did not foresee home sharing becoming part of the Section 230 debate.
Well, I think when it comes to Section 230, almost the weirdly positive thing about seeing this bill is it kind of shows that Section 230 is not just there for Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. Section 230 is really the backbone of what I call the user-generated internet. It used to be called Net 2.0, but basically, the internet where you can go on, get easy access to a service, and start posting your own, be they opinions, your own listings for things for sale, for rent, for whatever. And I think traditionally the Section 230 debate has been limited to, a discussion about content moderation on social media, as you say, the fight over social media regulation. But Section 230 hits so much more than that. This bill would amend it so that Airbnb, HomeAway, and a number of other short-term rental platforms would not be able or would find it very difficult to host the amount of user-generated content that they do today.
So what does that mean exactly when you're talking about home listings and user-generated content? So user-generated content is usually thought about in terms of content that people post on Facebook, like an article, or they post a rant, or they post pictures. Same for things like TikTok, Twitter, stuff like that. You don't want to be held liable for somebody doing something dangerous, hateful, posting something completely illegal on your platforms. That is on them and not the provider. But how does that tie into home listings? Because when I think of home listings, I don't think of it being user-generated content.
Well, I would kind of alter the sentence you said, right? Where you said, when I think of user-generated content, I think of people who post opinions, rants, or whatever. When you think of user-generated content, what you should think of is when people post. That's it. When you go to Airbnb is not the one posting or creating listings for short-term rentals on their platform. That is their users. Same for HomeAway, a similar service. When you go to eBay and you see people selling whatever they may be selling, there's plenty on there. That is also people posting that. That is not eBay posting that. That's what Section 230 is about. That's where it basically creates a direct form of liability. If I post something, I'm the one liable. If what is posted breaks the law, not the platform, I'm the one that has, in effect, really broken the law there. So, when you think on, how short-term rentals comes into this, it's because there are platforms out there. If I have a beach home or a home that I don't live in all the time, and I want to put it on HomeAway and let someone stay there on their vacation, as it may be much cheaper or much, in other ways, much better for them than a hotel would be, I can just put that up there. Now it's up to me to make sure that that short-term rental is compliant with all local ordinances, such as whether it has a carbon monoxide detector, whether I have a license and what's necessary for me to hold that license. But that's up to me, the poster, sharing my home with others, using these platforms to do so. Airbnb is not the one who goes to my house, decides to put it online. That's me. I'm just using a service provided by Airbnb.
Yeah, so I think in practice, basically like the carbon monoxide detector example might be interesting. So someone posts a home that actually is pretty unsafe. Maybe there is maybe there's no protection against carbon monoxide poisoning in that house. An incident occurs, two people who are renting the home that they got on HomeAway or Airbnb die from poisoning. That's not on Airbnb. That's on the person who posted it. But in this framework, it would be.
Under the framework, you mean the Plan Act?
Yes.
Yes. So if the Plan Act was to be passed, basically what it would do is say that Section 230, and it's kind of it's almost kind of clear in what it says. It says that listing property online is not protected, or Section 230 would not work in that situation. Funnily enough, while this is very much targeted at the short-term rental market, it also would actually impact things like rental listings on Craigslist and such. But basically what it would say is, yes, if the law was broken, and to be clear, with things like carbon monoxide alarms, the main law that we're talking about and the circumstance that you referenced, I believe is extremely, extremely rare. Like it would be national news if that happened in a short-term rental, or even in a hotel or any sort of temporary lodging.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say that most places have a local ordinance saying that you must have a carbon monoxide detector. I think that's a far more common example of what could happen here. And say a short-term rental was breaking a local law saying that all temporary lodging, hotels, and short-term rentals must have a carbon monoxide detector. And there was a property found without one. Currently, you would hold the owner of that property liable. They're the ones that know whether there's a carbon monoxide detector or not. They're the ones that own the property. But if the Plan Act was passed, you could go after Airbnb and HomeAway and these platforms too. And that provides a massive disincentive for these platforms to so freely allow people to post their listings. They would become liable for information that they don't have easy access to. Airbnb doesn't send out a local agent to your home to investigate it before it's listed.
Yeah.
Why not? Because that would make it so much more costly to run that service and make it far less accessible to people. So we really got to worry about the disincentive that this law would set for actually opening up this market, which is what these platforms have done, to really anyone with a spare room or some spare property to be able to put it online.
So I think I understand now exactly what this is getting at. How does the hotel lobby factor into this? Because I think the buzzword out there is cronyism, right? Like, another competing industry wants to try to tamp down using the law to stop their competition. John Bort, CEO of Pebblebrook Hotel Trust, so that's Embassy Suites, DoubleTree, a couple other hotels, said that Airbnb's low prices hurt their company's ability to price at what maybe the customer would describe as sort of gouging rates. So is this really about speech, safety, liability, or is this really about finding new ways to regulate these companies?
Well, so, in a broader sense, we normally find when there are specific exemptions or just even general attacks on 230, there's normally some sort of entrenched interest or industry that's kind of behind it. So, it might be the entertainment industry in certain circumstances. It might be the pharmaceutical industry and others. But rarely do we see one that is quite so transparently an attempt by an industry just to block out their competitors. The hotel industry comes in here because obviously if Airbnb is less able to provide listings to consumers, that means less competition. And as the CEO of Pebblebrook rightly said, that would undermine a hotel's ability to be able to price gouge consumers, especially during events like South by Southwest in Austin would be such an example. I really think it's quite a transparent attempt, more so than normal, because Rev Case himself used to be on the board of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, which is the main trade association for hotels and other forms of traditional lodging in the United States. As you say, Pebblebrook is actually a part of AHLA too. Two of Rep. Case's largest donors are also hotel chains. And he introduced this bill the very same week that the AHLA, that is the Hotel Association, is flying in members to lobby government. And this is one of the bills that they will be lobbying on. It really is quite a transparent attempt where we have examples before where hotels have complained about Airbnb providing, in their view, too much competition because they would prefer that there were none. And in a situation where hotels don't like Airbnb, we're finding that on the federal level, they're doing what they can to undermine Airbnb and other platforms like HomeAway. This is after that when they complain about compliance with a lot of local ordinances. This is recently put in a Reason article by Eric Boehm. These are ordinances that were passed and pushed for by hotel lobbying groups too, to further undermine short-term rental competition. This has been going on for a long time, and this is just the latest attempt and the first one I think I've seen at the federal level.
Rob, in your view, pertaining to sort of what Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have been alleging in the context of the Los Angeles drama, kind of whipped up by Trump in the past couple of days, do you think that HomeAway, Airbnb, home sharing apps contribute to the housing crisis?
I mean, I've not seen any really persuasive evidence out there that they are really the cause here. Now, of course, you kind of don't have to get into too much complex economics to see the argument of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. There is a demand for lodging, housing, and accommodation more generally, and there is a supply. In many of the cities where we're finding a housing crisis, one where rents are really, sky high, house prices are really sky high, it is because there is really no shift in the supply. There is no ability for local entrepreneurs or investors to be able to build new properties. As a result, any small increase in demand is going to have a large increase in price. I would say the issue here, though, is that the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warrens of the world, while the rent may be too damn high, their real issue is with demand. They just wish people wanted less housing, which really isn't a very dynamic or forward-looking view here. There's not been some. I've not seen any publicly released really good analysis on the impact of short-term rentals on house prices. But if it exists, I would be surprised if it was anything over a very small single-digit number, like even lower than 1% is what I would expect as an impact on increase of house prices. The housing crisis is complex. There's many reasons why demand has been growing for housing, and many of those reasons are good. I think demand for short-term rental is a good thing. It is people staying in local communities, going down and spending money in local businesses rather than just staying in hotel chains that have no investment in the local community, and spending money in very touristy areas that chains tend to dominate in. They're not going to their local coffee shop. They're going to Starbucks when they stay in large hotel chains. It's a different story with short-term rentals. But I think that the solution, sorry, go on.
The supply. And I was going to say, imagine if we could just increase the supply of these things and trying to so tightly regulate the demand. Rob, thank you so much for coming on to Underscored. I appreciate your time, and we'll get you back on here soon.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Have a great day.
All right, but we are not done yet. This conversation was all about, in some ways, the cost of regulation. The housing crisis is very much a problem being driven by overregulation in our nation's biggest cities. And so it actually reminded me of a piece that came out from a Young Voices writer just a few days ago by the name of Abigail Narbe. She wrote in Fee about this very issue, and I brought her on to talk about that as well. So with that, here's a bit of that conversation. All right, it is 2019, and I can still not get to the other side of the country, Los Angeles, New York, down to Florida, unless it is going to be incredibly expensive, take a really long time, and just generally make me grumpy. This is not the future that I thought I would be living in. And so that is why I wanted to have on Young Voices contributor Abigail Narbe, who wrote in Fee just this week about the hidden holdup to American innovation. And so, Abigail, welcome on to Underscored. I just want to start with this. Why can I not get anywhere quickly in this country? Where is my flying car and my high-speed rail?
Wow, that's quite a way to start things off, Stephen. We're just going to dive right in here. But to your point, it's a real shame because Back to the Future really predicted that we would have a lot more than we have right now in modes of transportation. I mean, where's our hoverboard? Where's our flying car? I don't know. Well, hoverboards.
Well, my hoverboard is currently on fire in the other room.
That's a good point. But yeah, so there's so many exciting things that we can think about with innovation. And there's so much that inventors and entrepreneurs in this country are working on, but we're not seeing it yet. And that's really frustrating. I think that's a pain point that you've highlighted.
Yeah, Elon Musk is kind of an example about that. You mentioned him in your piece that, he had the idea of doing a Hyperloop, and he actually announced the creation of a Hyperloop train. I don't really know what that means, but between New York City and DC, hyperspeed train. But what the heck happened?
Yeah. So in an Elon Musk way, he announced it over Twitter, which is, I think, usually PR best practices, in my understanding.
Of course.
But he had this idea for a Hyperloop train, so a train that moves really fast between New York and DC. And this is a commute that personally I got really excited about this announcement because I commute a lot between those two cities. And often it'll take about 5 hours, sometimes even more. And he wanted to build a train between the two cities that would cut that trip down to 29 minutes with technology that I do not know how to explain. But a lot of people got really excited about this, but almost immediately dozens of agencies and governments all responded to Musk and were like, where did you get approval for this? There's no way we're going to let this happen. And it really highlights an issue that we have in this country of the permission slips and the regulations that innovators need to get, which sometimes aren't even clear before you start inventing something, and the real cost that they present to us, to American consumers, because there are so many products that we could have and we could be using, but we really just don't get the chance to use because there's an entire system of agencies who, for not always for bad reasons, but who hold up that innovation and really stop a lot of progress that could be made.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of what economic principle applies to this. I was thinking like sunk cost fallacy, but that's not it. It's probably opportunity cost, right? I mean, you mentioned that, the cost of regulations amounts to somewhere around $4 trillion just in 2012 alone. And I'm curious, how does the price tag of regulations come about? How are you supposed to think about the cost of things that don't happen?
Yeah, so this is huge. And just to drive the point of the price tag a little bit more, all of the money that we use in our economy right now, like so this year, either creating or complying with regulation is the same amount of money that would be the GDP of the 9th largest country in the world. So all of the money that we put into obtaining and creating permission slips to do the work that we do in a productive economy is the same amount of the output that the 9th largest country in the world would have. So we're thinking like that's right in between India and Canada. So this is a huge amount of money that we have in the American economy, but we're not using because we're just putting it towards following rules. So typically when people talk about regulation, there's like that glass half empty side. And it's really kind of sad where you're like, there's so much money being wasted, people are getting taxed, blah, blah, blah. But there's also a really exciting side, and that's that we have in our economy the ninth largest economy that's not being used, and we could reutilize that towards innovation. And that's a huge opportunity that we have.
Well, I think there's no question that we have just sort of an incredibly stringent approach to dealing with new things. I mean, just in hospitals alone, just the idea of trying to get a new hospital in your area that is using different kinds of medical equipment that maybe is being used by a hospital further away from you, or it gets inhibited by, just simple things like certificate of need laws, right? Where you might have to travel all the way across town to go to a hospital because the hospitals work together to decide how many there should be in a certain given area and what kind of technology they can use, right? And I'm not like great at explaining that policy at all, but I mean, just the idea that you can't have an MRI machine in too many different doctors' offices at one time is incredibly centrally planned and very strange. That there's not more competition and flexibility in the market when it comes to tech.
Right. And you absolutely have a great point with thinking about things like MRI machines. Because wouldn't it make a little bit more sense if each doctor's office was deciding whether that was a worthwhile investment, whether enough people needed that to make it worthwhile for them to buy one, instead of their state or local government telling them that?
Yeah, for sure. What are you sort of viewing as the best ways to actually cut all the red tape that is tying up American innovators, people like Elon Musk? I mean, where should we focus? You hear a lot about Donald Trump, slashing regulations and all that, but I mean, has he done anything meaningful? Where do you do this? Federal, state, local? What's the best approach?
That is an amazing question.
Is it, or is it just too big?
It's really big. It's a really big question that a ton of people have thought about for decades. So I'm a little biased to think that me running around with a pair of scissors is going to cut enough red tape to make a difference. But I think there are a few areas where we have a lot of exciting opportunity. And one of them is housing regulations, because this is a bipartisan issue. So in 2016, the Obama administration put out a fantastic report, which sounds extremely nerdy to say, but it's an awesome report. It's called the Housing Development Toolkit. And they detailed how owners' housing regulations really hurt the least well-off in our nation. And especially in cities, which is where most of the economic development is happening right now, especially in those cities where you need to be to grow in a career. So think cities like New York, San Francisco, Boston, DC, etc. All of these cities have a lot of regulation around housing that makes it really expensive to live there, which is going to price out lower income and middle class families a lot quicker than it's going to price out people who are making a ton of money. And so I think this is one situation that we can learn from and grow coalitions around or whatever to make some real change. And I think we can start tackling things just to really make lives better off for everyday Americans.
Well, I am an everyday American, and I would like to get around the East Coast much quicker and free Elon Musk to do whatever he is going to do. So, Abigail Narbe, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. The piece is The Hidden Holdup to American Innovation. You can read more about that over at fee.org. Thank you so much to Abigail Narbe for coming on the Underscored podcast today. And with that, let's head into the weekend. It is Friday, September 20th. Enjoy the weekend. Storm Area 51. March with Greta Thunberg. Whatever works for you. Until we speak next, stay free.